So what we'll be covering in the next hour, we'll be doing a quick overview of Green Recovery Challenge Fund second round, so a quick recap on eligibility and themes. We'll be talking a little bit more about understanding the jobs and skills and economic recovery outcomes. We'll be talking then about understanding the nature of recovery outcomes. We'll then move on to the Padlet questions. We should have a good 30 minutes for questions, and then I'll come back in for some rounding up. We have 3 speakers today. Next slide, please. I'm Zelda Baverstock. I'm head of Green Recovery Challenge Fund on behalf of the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And I should have said at the outset that this is a fund provided by DEFRA, and the National Lottery Heritage Fund is acting in the role of administrator. Other speakers will introduce themselves as they come on screen. We also very kindly have Oliver Stanley on standby from DWP to answer any questions there may be about Kickstart. I will now hand over to John Boswell.
Thank you, Zelda. So yes, I'm John Boswell. I'm in the Green Finance Division in DEFRA, and I lead on the Green Recovery Challenge Fund for DEFRA. So just a quick overview of the fund as a whole. So the Green Recovery Challenge Fund was created to kickstart nature projects quickly as part of a green recovery from the pandemic. It was first announced last summer. We delivered a round last year with grant awards being announced in December. There was very high level of demand for round one with hundreds of applications. I can't remember the exact number, but we awarded 68 projects of a range of sizes that we announced in December. So the fund aims to deliver both environmental and economic benefits, and we'll come on to say a little bit more about those. But important to understand that it's looking at the environment, but also the economic benefits of the investment as part of a green recovery. Round 2 of the fund was announced by the Prime Minister as part of the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution back in November. So we weren't originally expecting a second round, but we're delighted that we're able to distribute a further £40 million in a second round. Next slide, please. Thank you. So round 2 is broadly the same as round 1. So that's really the key thing. We haven't made major changes to eligibility or themes or the kind of projects we want to see. The key changes we've made are these 3. So we are now limiting you to 1 application for each grant size as the lead applicant. You can be a partner organisation in others, but in terms of submitting an application, it's only 1 for the larger and the smaller for each of those. The grant limit, the maximum grant has been reduced from 5 million to 2 million, and we've introduced a minimum 5% cash partnership funding requirement, so a match funding requirement for all of the grants over 250,000. We've also provided some additional clarification and guidance on DEFRA priorities for the funds and on the assessment criteria, which again I'll just touch on in a moment. But all of those changes are listed in the guidance under key changes to the fund in round 2. Next slide. Okay, so who can apply? This hasn't changed in round 1. So the fund is open to environmental charities, so you must be registered with the Charity Commission. So that wouldn't apply, say, to community interest companies. But also to partnerships involving at least 1 environmental charity. So that's where pretty much any other kind of organisation can be involved. The only kind of organisation that can't be in a partnership is other central government bodies. And read the guidance for the restrictions around which organisations can receive grant funding. So, for example, private profit-making companies can't receive grant, but they can be part of the partnership. Okay, next slide, please. So as I say, the themes haven't changed, but we have put a little bit more in the guidance around the kind of projects that we're particularly looking for, because they're the kind of thing that particularly resonate with DEFRA's objectives. So nature conservation and restoration is the first theme, and you may well be aware of the Nature Recovery Network, which has launched more recently than the last round. So we're making more of a tie-in this time to projects that contribute to that. My colleague James in a while will talk about what that might look like in a bit more detail. Nature-based solutions is the second theme, and for that we're particularly looking for projects connected with climate change in terms of mitigation and adaptation. And the third is connecting people with nature, and again we're particularly interested in underrepresented groups, economically disadvantaged communities, and or projects that aim to improve health and well-being through access to nature. That's all in the guidance under what can you apply for. Next slide. So just to highlight the assessment criteria, we've just kind of tidied those up a bit so that they are clear. There are 5 equally weighted criteria around jobs, environmental outcomes, deliverability, value for money, and sustainability. There are also 2 balancing principles which are there to enable decision makers to put together a balanced portfolio of projects. So we expect, as last time, that there will be a lot of demand for this fund. We're expecting to have more good projects than we can fund. So these will be applied at decision-making stage to make sure that we've got a good coverage across the country and across the themes and priorities of the fund. There have been 1 or 2 questions about whether we're going to look back at round 1. So round 2 is totally separate. We're starting from a clean slate. We're not going to try and look back at projects from round 1. So it's all about getting a good spread in terms of the round 2 projects only. And that's all in the guidance as well. So green jobs, I said I'd say a little bit more about the economic outcomes. So this fund has really come about because of COVID-19 and the impact on the economy and the impact on environmental organisations who've as a result found it difficult to deliver projects. So what we want to see is how your projects will help you to create jobs or retain jobs. So equally important. So what impact is it going to have on your organisations and the people who work for you or the people who could work for you? And also your spend with suppliers and contractors. So we are also interested in the jobs impact there. You won't necessarily know who's going to be delivering your project. You won't necessarily have procured those people or those organisations. So we're just looking at the amount of spend to give us an idea of what kind of impact that might have on jobs. We're also interested in your proposals for skills, the kind of skills that you're going to need now and in the future, and also how those will help those people to be employable now and in the future. We're particularly interested in jobs and skills for young people or people in areas of high unemployment that particularly need economic investment at the moment. And that's all in the guidance under what can you apply for. And finally, on Kickstart, so as Zelda said, we do have Ollie here from DWP. If we have particular questions we need to ask him about, but I'll give a quick overview. So Kickstart funds new job placements for 16 to 24-year-olds on universal credit at risk of long-term unemployment. The placements are for 6 months. And as things stand, they can start up until the end of December. So we recognise that doesn't necessarily cover the full recovery challenge from the fund project timetable, but certainly we think that should give any successful applicants time to set projects up and start employing Kickstart participants by that time. Placements should build skills in the workplace and provide employment experience. So that a key part of putting applications into Kickstart is showing how you will support the participants as well as just employing them. Kickstart covers 100% of wages on the national minimum wage. I've put national living wage there because my understanding is if participants turn 25 during their placement, then they can be paid at the higher rates, but otherwise it's at the minimum wage. 25 hours a week, and that includes national insurance and pension, plus a 1,500 payment to help with setup and skills support. There have been some changes recently that you may have seen. You don't have to apply through a gateway organisation anymore if you don't want to, although you can if you do want to. And so that means that you can apply for any number of placements now, and it's open to employers of all sizes. The link to further information about Kickstart is there. We will come back to this later because there have been one or two questions on the Padlet about Kickstart that I think we're going to address later as well. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to my colleague James Petts from Natural England.
Thanks, John, and good morning, everyone. James Petts, Senior Advisor in Natural England, and I've been working on the GRCF since October last year. So as John said, there's the three themes are the same as they were in round one. So I'm just going to highlight a few aspects from a Natural England perspective that we'd encourage applicants to think about in their projects. So we really want to support nature conservation and recovery for the long term. It's only possible at scale, so it's not just about site by site as well. So I think this understanding was really crystallised by Professor John Lawton in his study 10 years ago now about making the natural world more ecologically resilient. And Professor Lawton came up with 4 principles or approaches of bigger, better, more and more joined up. So in terms of bigger, it might be larger in scale, less fragmented, and sites that are buffered from certain pressures. Better in terms of the habitat being enhanced and being in better condition. And habitats that need good management and people managing those areas. More in terms of greater populations and diversity of species, and also habitat mosaics, thinking about not just one particular habitat, but a range of different habitats in a particular area. And the last one, more joined up, is about ecological connectivity, to allow the movement of species and habitats to adapt to environmental change. So you'll see in a little picture there's landscape corridors, linear corridors, and the stepping stone corridors. So it's about what connectivity exists between different areas of nature. Next slide, please. So John mentioned the Nature Recovery Network, which has been launched since the first round. Nature Recovery Network is an integrated and coherent spatial framework for investment in nature recovery. So we'd really encourage people applying to the GRCF to see how their projects would help to develop the Nature Recovery Network if they were involved in the first theme, nature recovery. And the map there is showing how species might migrate given different temperatures, and there's lots of different tools and maps out there to allow the identification of what already exists out there, but also the opportunities to recover nature. And to make nature recovery truly sustainable, people have to be involved in planning for its recovery. Next slide, please. So just to touch base on nature-based solutions, which is obviously the second theme of the GRCF, round 2. As John mentioned, contributing to the government's net zero target, for example, capturing more carbon, both on land but also in the marine environment, and also adaptation to climate change, so allowing species and habitats to adapt to changes in environmental pressures. For example, nature-based solutions, natural flood management, things like leaky dams to help reduce flood risk, good soil management to reduce soil loss and improve water quality, blue carbon approaches such as seagrass restoration, and also green infrastructure in urban areas to manage heat stress and to reduce air pollution as well. Think about nature-based solutions, really the ultimate outcome is to human health and well-being through nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. And just to touch on strategic plans and strategies when thinking about projects for the GRCF, get a sense of what you're trying to achieve in the wider landscape, or what things might benefit, and what else is happening locally. How is the project going to be a bigger block of nature recovery? How does it fit in with the wider strategic jigsaw? So there's lots of counties and landscapes that already have plans at their level for nature conservation, and we've also got the forthcoming local nature recovery strategies being developed as well. Next slide, please. So just to touch base on some of the other funds, certainly encourage people to look at some of the other funds that are going to be coming on stream or already exist, particularly the England Woodland Creation Grant Scheme for tree planting, and the Peat Capital Grant Scheme for peatland restoration and countryside stewardship for hedgerows. The guidance has a full list of other funds and the additional information. So we're interested in not the GRCF not funding those things that those funds can fund, but how do they complement? How can they work in synergy together as well? And just to note, the not allowable part of the match funding or partnership funding is are the Natural Lottery Heritage Fund grants. So that's my spot, and over to Zelda for the Padlet.
Thank you, James. We'll move over now to the Padlet questions and the Q&A part of the session. We'll head straight into one of the juicy ones on subsidy control. It had a large number of likes against it. So the first question is, does the lead applicant have to make a declaration in relation to subsidy control on behalf of all partners? As this is new to us, is there any comeback on the applicant if a partner gets this wrong? What I would say is, as it's outlined in the guidance, it is an applicant's responsibility to consider any potential subsidy issues that arise from public funding that could be allocated to the project. So you do therefore need to consider the project as a whole and discuss with your partners that would be in receipt of funding if successful. Now, do recognise this is a new system and it is fairly early days, but in general, I would treat this in the same way that you would have treated it previously as a state aid assessment. There's guidance on gov.uk and there's a link in the main guidance for that. So that should help you to be able to assess whether the funding could constitute a subsidy. In general, the principles are so similar that I think I wouldn't have undue concerns, but I would particularly be looking closely at projects that have connections with agricultural producers or fisheries. Those would be the areas of probably where you'd need the closest scrutiny. If you are unclear, we would recommend that you seek legal advice, particularly for the larger grant applications. And if you really think that you have a potential issue, I would include legal costs as an eligible cost within your large grant application. In the event that a grant is deemed to be unapprovable subsidy, this does actually constitute a breach in the terms of grant. This is the same under state aid, so it's not a change in a position from us. This is the same position. And if that happened, you would have to repay the entire grant. However, before people panic unduly, I'd stress that we do consider that to be an unlikely occurrence. And from the first round, all 68 grants, none of them were state aid. Second question, do we need to make a subsidy control statement if we're seeking less than £250,000? Again, yes, you do still need to consider it. In round one, we asked you to submit a separate letter. We're not asking you to submit a separate letter this time around, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't think it through and write within your application that you have considered it and that to alert us if you believe there to be an issue. Next question, please. Next, we've got a series of questions on jobs and apprenticeships. John, can I hand these back to you?
Yes, thank you. So yes, a few questions in the Padlet about jobs and apprenticeships. The first one is about what proportion of the budget should focus on jobs and salaries. The quick answer is there's no set proportion that we're expecting. So what we want to see is just how many jobs that you are going to be creating. But as I said earlier on, that can include your spending on contractors and suppliers. So I think we'd expect in most cases that probably the majority of your grant request, one way or another, is going to be going on either on staffing costs or on spend with contractors and suppliers. But it's really down to you to make your case. In terms of jobs being new or existing, I think I probably covered that earlier, that they're equally important. Particularly if jobs are at risk within your organisation, then retaining those would be just as important as creating new ones. Then the third point is probably a little bit wider than just apprentices potentially. So we are looking for projects that deliver employment opportunities. We're not in the business of just kind of funding employment for its own sake. So what that means for this query is that we would only want to fund those element of apprentice roles where they are working on projects, and that would apply to other staff as well, or say Kickstart participants or whatever. So we would just want to fund where they are working on your project. So if they're working more broadly, then you'd need to find that funding from somewhere else. There were a couple of other queries on jobs that I'll just cover off now in case. Oh no! In fact, there's another slide, even better. So the next one is on whether jobs have to be assigned to the environmental charity. So really, this is about who can be grant funded, and again, that is all in the guidance. But the non-profit organisations can receive grant, and so they can employ people through the project. So the job doesn't have to be, or the jobs don't just have to be with the environmental charity or charities within your partnership. But we would not expect them to be in, say, private sector organisations, because those organisations can't be grant funded through the project. And then the second one is really around, I think, around freelancers and fixed-term jobs. And I think there were one or two other questions around that. It's really about the nature of the contract that you have. If you have an employment contract with somebody, really however long it is, that would count as a job from our perspective. In the application guidance, we are asking to see full-time equivalents as well as numbers. So obviously, if you're employing lots of people on very short-term contracts, then your full-time equivalent figure would be correspondingly lower. So that's how we will be able to assess that. Otherwise, if people are being employed on a, say, a freelance basis or sole trader basis, that would be through your spend on contractors.
Thanks, John. If you could stay on for the next slide as well, please.
Yeah. So Kickstart, I said we'd say a little bit more about this, and Ollie from DWP Ollie, you can jump in if you want to add anything to this. So the first question around being unsuccessful with Kickstart. So we would generally expect if you are applying to Kickstart just in relation to this project, then we would expect you to submit that application once you've heard back from Heritage Fund about this application. Currently, DWP standards for turning around Kickstart applications are at about 20 days, and we understand that generally job centres are turning applications around within that time now. So there would be plenty of time once you've heard back from us, then to submit that application as part of the kind of project setup. And we think that if you've got as far as that with our application, then that would put you in a good position to put forward a strong Kickstart application. I think the other element, as I said earlier, was making sure that you are including some good solid proposals for kind of employability support. Ollie, did you want to add anything on that point?
No, I think you've covered it perfectly. I think it's, one of our main concerns is just the employability support. So if you make it clear, then we're happy.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, we're aware that that Kickstart is not it's not kind of a given. You know, there is a risk attached to it, but it's not a kind of competitive fund in the way that this is. So if you submit a strong application to it, so you can show good proposals for how you're going to employ those people, then there is a good chance of success, and that is turned around quite quickly. So given that, we would not expect to fund those costs where we think they are better funded by Kickstart, but they can be so they'll be included within your application as costs, but offset by income from Kickstart, if you see what I mean. So they can be included as match funding, but we would not expect the fund to pay for them. As I said earlier, that only runs up until the end of December currently. So if you wanted to employ job placements that's kind of further along in your project, then that would be fine. I think there was also a question about if you wanted to employ people for longer, then you could include costs for that as well. I think somebody was saying that they'd need to employ people for 12 months. I can't see any reason why you couldn't keep those people on in those jobs and use our fund to pay for that. Then there was a question about topping up from national minimum wage to living wage. Because this is all government funding, the government funding just pays at minimum wage, so you wouldn't be able to use this fund either to make that top up. That would have to be something that would be discretionary for your organisation if you wanted to make that top up to the living wage.
Thank you, John. Next, we've got some questions about consents, and then after that, some questions about outcomes. So, James, can I hand those to you, please?
Yeah, thanks, Elder. This is a good question. I mean, the short answer to this is yes, it would be seen as more risky, but to a degree. I mean, GRCF is looking for ready to deliver projects, so we are looking for those permissions, permits, consents, licenses to be in place, or at least their application in train. So yeah, we would see it as more risky, but we'd also be looking to see if the project can demonstrate a clear plan and who they've been consulting to acquire those permissions, and whether that's in an appropriate and a timely manner. So projects will obviously be looked at in the round across the criteria, but that is one of the factors we'll be looking at, and there's further information in the guidance. Yeah.
Thanks. Can we have the next slide, please? James, can you stay on to deliver the outcomes?
So yeah, really good question on first couple on edge-based solutions. In terms of the scale of the projects, whether hectares or the depth of environmental delivery, especially in urban context. Well, nature-based solutions is quite a broad term. There are a whole range of nature-based solutions. So it could be either, but it very much depends on the expected benefits of those nature-based solutions. So how you measure those benefits or those metrics will depend on the nature-based solution in question. On the second one, are we looking at challenging barriers to adoption of nature-based solutions or just delivery of nature-based solutions? Well, the focus is on delivery, I'd say, but if something is an essential precursor to delivery of those nature-based solutions, that's in the initial stages of a project, then that will obviously be logical if it's essential to have that in place before delivery can take place. So things like survey, research, other factors, but we would want to see the implementation of those nature-based solutions as part of the project. So we're not looking for projects that just focus on challenging those barriers or doing groundwork for delivery. Third question, forestry training in non-partner organisations will drive delivery of green jobs. Is there a real need and opportunity with hard to illustrate outcomes? Is this an issue? Well, the fund is outcome based. We are looking for tangible outcomes on the ground. There's a lot more information in the guidance on the outputs and the activities that we know can lead to those outcomes. So we're really thinking about kind of a logical chain between activities, outputs, outcomes and expected benefits. Obviously, benefits to biodiversity can take quite a while to be realised. We recognise that, but we're looking for that logical chain that is likely to lead to those outcomes. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, James. Next, we've got a series of questions on costs. I'll take some of these. So firstly, can you confirm that capital costs eligibility is the same for ENGOs and national parks AONBs? I've just taken the easy question here. The answer is yes, I can confirm that. Secondly, does match have to be cash or can it be in kind, such as staff time contributions or volunteers? So no, for this fund, we are only looking at cash partnership funding, cash match funding, not staff time or in kind or volunteer time. Thirdly, there's a couple of questions that are along similar lines here, which is about the appropriateness of including funding for consultancy fees to deliver longer term management plans, or there was another one which was drawing up a catchment-based delivery plan within the funding with identified works taking on outside the funding envelope. So the answer here is yes, you can include for consultancy fees or development plan fees for longer term management. We are really interested to see consideration of project legacy. As James said, we recognise not all environmental outcomes can be achieved within a short funded duration. So we do want to see how you will continue to carry forwards those sort of positive impacts. However, I would say that we expect those costs to be proportionate, and the weighting should be on active delivery, not on future planning. Can we have the next slide, please? Then we have a few further questions on costs. So we had one on environmental charities. Do we expect charities to recover VAT on grant-funded work delivered on local authority land? I think the principle here is that if you are able to claim back VAT, you shouldn't include it as a project lost. And yes, we do expect you to recover VAT where you are able to, irrespective of where you are working. Secondly, it's a sort of precise question on if we can apply for funding to pay for rent to accommodate additional staff. And yes, again, this is an eligible cost, so the support needs of new staff are definitely eligible within the fund. Next slide, please. We have a series of questions about partnership funding. John, can we come back to you for these?
Yeah, so first question is about where the match funding comes from. Does it matter that it would come from other government agencies? There are two answers to this question. So it doesn't matter in terms of meeting your minimum 5% partnership funding. So we're not requiring that has to come from non-government sources. The only funding that you can't match against it is other Heritage Fund schemes, because you'd be applying twice to the same body. But otherwise, we haven't stipulated that the match funding can't come from other agencies in government. But within our value for money assessment, we have said that we are looking for overall value for money for public funds as a whole, and that's a fairly well established principle in government. So you would perform a bit better on value for money if your match funding was coming from outside government. But obviously there are lots of other considerations in value for money as well, like what do your costs look like, and what are you delivering for the grant request. So it wouldn't necessarily be the only factor, but it would certainly strengthen your application if you were able to identify match funding from elsewhere. We do appreciate that partnership funding is quite hard to find at the moment, which is why we've kept the minimum down as low as 5%. The next question was about being able to use generated income, and this one's particularly around sales from educational resources, but this would apply to any kind of income generated, or really any income that you haven't secured by the time that you want your project to start. That is absolutely that's absolutely fine. What you will need to do is to be realistic about what you can expect to generate, because you would need to underwrite it. So if kind of during the project actually your projections fall way short of what you were expecting, then that would fall on your organisation to cover the difference. So I think our advice would be make sure you have a clear fundraising plan and that it's realistic, because ultimately you will be underwriting it. And the third one I think is probably maybe something around a confusion around what we mean by partnership funding, but we really mean match funding. So that doesn't mean that it needs to be contributed by partner organisations directly or indirectly. It can come from anywhere and through any of your organisations as long as it's there.
Thanks, John. If you could stay on for the next slide as well.
So this one is about the first one here is about whether it makes sense to link projects or kind of in some way overlap them. Our strong advice here is not to do either of those things. If you have overlap between your two separate applications in each grant tier, then both of them are likely to be rejected. We also advise you not to create dependencies between them, so that one is dependent on the other, because then if one of them is turned down, then the other one is likely to be as well. What we would say is that this time around, you may have seen from the timetabling that actually you would expect to hear back from, if you submit an expression of interest for a large grant, you should hear back about that one in advance of the deadline for the medium. So if you were unsuccessful at expression of interest stage, one option open to you is to downscale that project and submit it as a project under 250,000. So that would be one way around that kind of conundrum. And the second one is a much simpler question. If you've been successful in round one, can you still apply? The answer is absolutely. So I was talking earlier about the kind of clean slate approach. We're not going to be marking people down based on success at round one. What we would say is that if we've funded you to work in a particular location and you're proposing to work in that location again, you would need to demonstrate how what you are doing is additional. You'd need to demonstrate why there is still a need and an opportunity for this new project that you're applying for. And also, we will be interested to see that you have the capacity to deliver both projects at the same time. But certainly, in principle, there's no reason why you can't apply if you've been successful at round one.
Thanks, John. Right, so actually it's a very similar question. So if we were unsuccessful in the previous round, should we change the application for a different project or reapply as before? So yes, so we have a number of questions that are sort of variants on a similar theme. I just wanted to highlight on this one that if you were an unsuccessful eligible project under £250,000, you should have received an email over the last fortnight with some high-level feedback about what made a successful application in round one. If you don't think you received that email, get in touch with the Green Recovery Challenge Fund inbox and we'll investigate. Also, I would say do check your spam filter first just to see whether or not it landed in there. Really, it's up to you to decide whether or not you are able to action the advice in that to improve your previous application. As John said, do note that we do expect to receive more good projects and there are funds available. There was a further question on what was the success rate last time around. We awarded 68 projects and we had over 600 applications in total. So as you can see, very heavily oversubscribed. There was a further question on, please can you confirm that you simply use the standard forms on National Lottery grants for heritage? Yes, that is the case. Due to the pace at which we develop this fund, we're simply not able to instigate new forms for this fund. What that does mean, of course, is that there are some slight mismatches in what the form asks for and what Green Recovery Challenge Fund is asking for. Now, I'm sorry if that appears confusing, but we have produced a very detailed set of application help notes. I would really recommend that you keep them open in front of you as you are applying. The application help notes documents take you through box by box by box and are really specific about what we want you to put in each section. So as long as you follow that guidance closely, you won't go far wrong. I think we have just a few minutes spare just to do a quick check on what other Padlet questions may be highly liked. John, there's the inevitable one. Will there be a round three? I know you won't be able to say anything about that. But, so we have a few about eligibility again. Can community interest companies apply? John covered this at the start. No, community interest companies cannot apply in their own right. They can only apply in partnership with an environmental charity that is registered with the Charity Commission. There's also a question on how is an environmental charity defined? The way we approach it is we look at your Charity Commission listing and we also ask you to submit your constitution your constitution as a supporting document. So we check your constitution, we look at your objects or what your charitable aims are, and we look at your Charity Commission listing. And if it is clearly concerned with care, improvement, conservation, engagement with the environment, then that is eligible. Sorry, I can't be any more specific than that. So the question was, would a recreational trust responsible for local green space be eligible? It really depends on how your charitable objects have been written. Again, if you're making a partnership application with an environmental charity, does the environmental charity need to be the lead applicant? No, they don't need to be the lead applicant. They do need to be in the partnership. John, one further one about sort of value for money and approach to match funding. Would applications score better if they had a higher percentage of match funding above the minimum 5% required? Would you be able to take that?
Yes, so this comes back to the question of the value for money assessment. So we certainly encourage people to see this as a floor rather than a ceiling. It's a minimum, but you will certainly score more highly on value for money, all other things being equal, if you were able to demonstrate more match funding. We have deliberately enabled it so that it doesn't need to be secured in advance, so that that gives you a bit more time to identify sources of it, or put in place a realistic fundraising plan, as I talked about earlier. One observation we had from actually a successful applicant at round one, where we didn't require match funding, was whether we would mark a project down on delivery risk if they put too much match funding in. I mean, I think all I can say on that is, again, that's probably a judgment call for you to make. That if you submit match funding that looks unrealistic and is all unsecured, and it doesn't look as if it will be achievable, then yes, you probably would then be marked down on deliverability. So I think it's just a judgment for you to make. Try to put in more than 5%, but don't overpromise.
Thanks, John. I'm just looking to see if we can fish out anything else. There's still a bit of confusion about calculation of full-time equivalents. So how would we calculate the full-time equivalents of jobs created within suppliers or contractors? We can say that you don't actually have to do that, John, do you?
Yeah, so that's why we're asking for spend with them, because actually what we're trying to do is be consistent across applications. And I think if we asked everyone to calculate in a particular way, we'd probably just end up with people doing it in lots of different ways. So we will make a judgment based on the amount that you're spending, and come to a kind of rough idea of how many jobs that might be expected to create or retain.
There's also an interesting question I would just like to cover, just for absolute clarity's sake, because there's one that, as interest has been so high in the previous round and potentially in this round too, will this be something that HLF looks towards more in the future, particularly in the face of climate crisis? Now, we really need to be clear here. National Lottery Heritage Fund, this is not our money. This is a DEFRA fund. It's coming direct from DEFRA, and we are the administrator. So it is nothing to do with the National Lottery whatsoever. However, nature and environment remains one of the National Lottery's strategic priorities as well, and do look at the National Lottery Heritage Fund Open Grants Programme as alternative sources for certain types of project. And we, as the National Lottery Heritage Fund, also highly welcome projects around land and nature, but can't really stress highly enough that this fund is not anything to do with the National Lottery. Okay, I think we're coming towards the end, so if we can have the last slide, please, and I'll just talk through the next steps. So once again, there is a lot in the guidance. It's very detailed, so do keep rereading it. You will find answers to most of the things we've covered today in there. As I've already covered, please do check the application help notes for how to fill in the forms. Remember also to use the correct project plan template. And if you are struggling to find any of those things, they are in the help notes and templates section on the website. So go to the Green Recovery Challenge Fund webpage, scroll down near the bottom, there's a section called help notes and templates. In there you will find application help notes and the project plan template. Once again, please only submit the supporting documents that we are asking for. If you submit anything in addition to that, it won't be looked at and won't form part of your assessment. Equally, please make sure that you do submit the correct supporting documents on the deadline. We do not chase up, and we will not chase up missing supporting documents for this fund. And if there are missing supporting documents, you will not be assessed. So do pay attention to that. If you're having problems uploading supporting documents on as you reach the deadline, you can email them through to the Green Recovery Challenge Fund inbox. And again, I would stress, please use the Green Recovery Challenge Fund inbox and not any other National Lottery Heritage Fund email address that you might have in your address book, just to make absolutely sure that the right fund receives it. So, deadlines. Deadline for expressions of interest for grants over £250,000 is 12th of noon, 22nd of March. And then the deadline for applications of 50,000 to 250,000, 12th of Moon, 14th of April. Now, I would say, as some of you are aware, that there were pressures on the portal, our applications portal last time, because a very high number of applicants waited till the morning of the deadline to try to submit. And I would suggest that particularly if you are reapplying, and try not to use the entire 5-week application window. We have given a longer application window this time around, but we would really ask you, if you are able to, please don't wait till the morning of the deadline to submit. If you can come in when you are ready, that's fantastic and reduces the likelihood of pressures on the website. Decisions for all of these, for both grant levels, should be coming in July. So we'll be looking for project starts no later than the start of September. So we've covered an awful lot today. So just to remind you that this has been recorded. Next week we'll be supplying the video and a set of frequently asked questions. We won't cover every single question in the frequently asked questions, and that'll be a very long document. But we'll email those across to you when they are available. And we will also ask you if you can complete a very quick evaluation on whether or not this webinar has been helpful to you. That'd be great for us if you wouldn't mind completing that. So I think all that leaves is a huge thank you. Thank you very much to John and to James for your input this morning. Thanks to Lucy for driving things behind the scenes, and thank you all for attending. Best of luck.